Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I'm going to be doing a video on the top political fantasy series that I want to read that also happen to be completed. Now, political fantasy is one of my favourite subgenres of fantasy. I love it when there are lots of machinations, there's court intrigue, there's people backstabbing each other. I love it when characters have game plans that not even we can see coming, and that's why political fantasy will always be one of my favorite genres in general, but also one of my favorite subgenres of fantasy. I have read a decent amount of political fantasy for that reason, but there are a couple of series that I have on my radar that I am absolutely dying to read, the only limit being time. But I think if I put this out into the open, maybe it will incentivize me to pick up these series sooner rather than later. I will be doing another version of this where I will be talking about sci-fi series because there is a whole ton of those that I want to read as well. But today we're just going to focus on fantasy. One of my favorite things about fantasy is that it's not always just about swords and magic and dragons. Sometimes the real action happens in the throne room, the council chamber, or behind closed doors. I love fantasy with political complexity, morally grey choices, and the kind of long game thinking that makes or breaks. The series that I have picked to be on this list are not ranked in any particular order. So with that in mind, let's dive in. So the first series I have on this list is The Song of the Shattered Sands by Bradley P. Beaulieu. I said that way wrong. I apologize, Bradley. With the first book being 12 Kings of Sharakai. Now, this series is set in a desert city that is ruled by immortal tyrants, and we are essentially following one woman who fights to uncover her past to bring the empire to its knees. I mean, come on guys, that sounds absolutely incredible in itself, right? And one of the key reasons why I want to read this series is because it's got that Middle Eastern inspired world building that we don't often see in Western fantasy. We are seeing more of it, which is great, but generally I've heard really good things about the way that Bradley has done the world building in this particular series. And to be honest with you, that is an instant win for me. I've also heard that the character development in this book is really good. From what I understand, our main character is a gladiator by day and a rebel by night. There is this kind of mixture of this individual's personal revenge story, but then also broader themes around rebellion and revolution, which I always like in my fantasy series. I have also heard that there is really deep lore in this world. There's ancient magic, forgotten gods, and political history that is layered into every single alley of Sharakai. I have heard that this book is not technically grimdark, but that it is very serious in tone. It's full of emotional weight and sacrifice that each of these characters faces, and also consequences from the decisions that each of these characters make. I've heard that it is focused much more on hopeful rebuilding rather than just moral collapse, which I think can often be a nice counterweight to some of the darker stuff that I typically read. But I've heard generally that the setting is very immersive, there is a very slow burn plot, and that the pacing and that the slow build up really does pay off by the end of the series. This feels like a series where like you're in it for the long haul, you kind of have to commit to it and you kind of have to see where it takes you. And to be honest with you, that is really, really appealing to me. The next series on my list is one that I have talked about previously on my channel and I still haven't started it, and I'm hoping that this will make me pick it up. And that is the Dagger and the Coin series by Daniel Abraham. Daniel Abraham is an absolutely phenomenal writer. Every single book of his that I have read thus far, which I think is 5 now, I have absolutely loved. The reason why I really want to read the Dagger and the Coin is because this has merchants in it. And merchants are like one of my favorite types of groups in fantasy. Not even just in fantasy, to be honest, but we predominantly see it a lot in fantasy. And that in itself is enough to appeal to me. In terms of the plot, this is essentially following bankers and merchants who are responsible for the future of the empire, rather than what we typically get, which is kings and generals. And I do really like that kind of angle of it because I think it aligns also with my own personal interests. Why I really want to read this book is because of that rare focus on the power of banking and economics as political weapons. Some of my favorite fantasy books actually have that as a core feature, and so I just know I'm going to eat it up, especially with the way that Daniel Abraham writes. The cast of characters includes, you know, a banker, a noble, a warlord, and that just sounds like such an interesting set of characters because they're all playing from different angles. of the same collapsing system. And because I've read Abraham before, I know for a fact his character work is going to deliver, because he is such a character-driven writer. He is so good at fleshing out characters, really giving them depth and meaning, and I have a feeling that that is going to play out in this series as well. From what I understand, this book really gets to the core of how empires really work: trade, debt, propaganda, and diplomacy, not just fighting a battle or using magic, which, don't get me wrong, that's interesting at times, but I think it's particularly interesting when we see it from a very different angle, which is often the boring angle, let's be honest. But to me, that's actually the most interesting aspect. I've heard that this is also another slow burn, and as I've said many times before, I don't mind that. And in fact, I actually really enjoy slow burns, particularly when you have a really great payoff by the end of the series, and I have heard that that does sustain. I also think this is just a really underrated series as well. I think Abraham in general is quite underrated, particularly as it relates to his fantasy. I have a feeling that this is going to be a series that I love, and I really want to start it this year for that exact reason. All right, the next one is the Empire Trilogy by Raymond E. Feist and Janie Wirtz, with the first book being Daughter of the Empire. This is a series that I've been delaying because I wanted to read all of Raymond E. Feist's books in publication order, and I just don't think that's going to happen, just because I'm not as interested in some of his other series that come before this series, and I just want to read it, to be honest. Like, this series sounds like the perfect kind of series for me. From what I understand, this series follows kind of our main character, who is trapped in a deadly political game where the rules of power are being rewritten all the time. And this is, I think, just a classic series full of court intrigue, with poisonings, assassinations, arranged marriages, ritual honor codes. And to be honest with you guys, I love that stuff. I really eat it up. I've heard that the main character is really smart, politically adept, and she's very underestimated, but also ruthless at the same time. Another character type that I also really enjoy. In terms of the world, it's set in a very rigid, caste-bound society where noble houses are constantly jockeying for power, and the main character is essentially forced to take over her house after a particular event occurs, and so she's kind of thrown into the deep end. Again, you don't need to tell me more than that. I mean, that sounds absolutely incredible. I've heard it's kind of very tense, quite layered, very emotionally rich. This is a cult classic, I think, when it comes to political fantasy. And I think it's generally very highly praised for its storytelling and the emotional arcs that it has throughout the series. It sounds wonderful. I just want to read all these series right now, but obviously I can't. The next series is A Chorus of Dragons by Jen Lyons, and that by Jen Lyons, I don't know, with the first book being The Ruin of Kings. This is a series that I've had on my list for so long, and this is a book where, you know, you're essentially following the chosen one who is potentially going to upend the entire world as we know it. And I've heard that this series is quite intense and quite wild. You know, there's multiple timelines, there's unreliable narrators, and that kind of constantly is recontextualizing what you know in any given moment of time. From what I understand, there's a lot around identity and legacy, politics, but then there's also dragons who also have opinions, so you know they have their own kind of emotional depth to them as well, which I always love. I love a good like succession crisis. I love it when kind of there's a character that has been unwittingly thrown into a situation that they weren't anticipating. I've heard that it's very fast-paced, quite twisty. There's lots of betrayals, lots of shocking reveals, and it's just a generally really good fun time. Like, this just sounds like a really good popcorn read, but that is also well written and has genuinely really good characters. Like, I'm so excited. Then we have another really great series that, I mean, to be fair, all of these series have been on my list for a long time, but this one has been particularly for a long time, and that is Kushelles Legacy by Jacqueline Carey, with the first book being Jack Kushell's Dart. And the great thing about this series is that this is a series set in a much broader world, so there are, I think, 2 more series following on from that. And this one follows a courtesan who is also a spy, and she is blessed by pain, and I think she uses that to unravel court conspiracies that threaten a kingdom. Guys, I mean, come on. Who wouldn't want to read that? This is like very much high fantasy, but it's through the lens of sensuality and spirituality, which I think is generally quite rare. I've heard really excellent things about the main character, Phaedra, I think is how you say it. She's part spy, part seductress, part historian. But the key thing is that the seductress aspect of it isn't done to appease a certain type of reader, which I really appreciate. This book is all about agency and identity and the price of loyalty, which sounds incredible. I believe this is also set in like a French-inspired world, a France-inspired world, but there's like divine bloodlines and there's alliances that are kind of hanging by a thread. There's a lot of espionage, kind of foreign policy and court manipulation, and the politics is really woven into seduction, diplomacy, religion and war, which I think is very much reflects the reality. I've heard that the writing is quite lyrical, it's quite layered, it's quite emotional, and it also has a lot of depth and originality, which I think we are lacking in the fantasy genre these days. I don't think this is a sort of series that is going to be for everybody. Like, there is a lot of mature content in it. From the people that I've seen talk about it, they talk about it generally very positively, and I think it's going to be an absolute great series to read. The next one that we have is one that is very beloved in the book community, and that is the Dangaline Dynasty by Ken Liu, with the first book being The Grace of Kings. This is, I believe, following like a very epic rebellion, which becomes an even more epic empire, and the politics never ever stops. And this is kind of Asian inspired, East Asian inspired, but then there is also like a technology element to it as well, which is quite cool. I believe it starts with a revolution, and then that kind of sets the scene for a much deeper exploration of how people rule and how empires are not only made, but how they are also unmade. I believe there are like a bunch of different characters that we're following, whether it's a warrior, a strategist, lots of different factions, inventors, nobles, which just sounds great, and I think implies there's a lot of depth to the world. There's lots of court politics and philosophical discussions around like governance and the weight of legacy. And I believe that this is also deeply rooted in real world parallels, specifically the Han Dynasty, and also has parallels to Confucianism and classical epics, which sounds incredible. I have heard a couple of people call this the Asian Game of Thrones, but I've heard also that that actually is a disservice to the series, because many people have said that it's actually much more thoughtful and also potentially more idealistic at times as well. I have also heard that the writing tends to be quite dense in places in this series, but the themes and the world building is incredibly rich and really adds to the overall feel of this series. Lastly, on this list for this video, we have the Inheritance Trilogy by N.K. Jemisin, with the first book being The 100,000 Kingdoms. And this is where a mortal woman gets caught up in a divine power struggle and learns how to play politics with gods. I love that. I love it when there's like a mortal character and they're fighting against gods, and there's that kind of imbalance of power, and yet somehow the mortal character manages to outwit the gods. I love it. It's great. Obviously, Jemisin is an absolute powerhouse, and I believe this series was her debut, and it kind of really put her on the map because it's bold, it's complex, and it was very much ahead of its time. I believe this book really kind of centers around identity, legacy, and surviving a court where there is so much intrigue that you cannot trust anything or anyone. There is also a succession element here. As I mentioned earlier, I really love political intrigue where there is like a succession aspect to it. There are lots of grudges and family trauma, and you kind of have to trawl through all of that to really kind of get to the root of what's going on. I've heard that the writing is quite poetic, it's quite intimate. Themes are around kind of oppression, cultural erasure, and power imbalances, which I would expect from N.K. Jemisin. This is obviously a very widely acclaimed series, so I have relatively high expectations for this one. But I think it's also important to set expectations that this doesn't necessarily have court intrigue in the typical sense. It's court drama that's kind of really dialed up with elements of mythology layered into it. And to be honest, that also sounds really great. It gives you a slightly different angle to explore. It sounds incredible. Like, I can't wait through this series. And to be honest with you, I've not heard many people talk about this series as it relates to in my kind of circle and the people who watch videos on this channel. So I'm really curious whether it's for this series or any of the other series on this list. whether you like this series, whether you would recommend these series to people who have a particular love and are particularly drawn to political fantasy. So let me know down below in the comments what your thoughts are and if there are any other series that you would add to this list. Now, there are certain series that I purposefully left off, like Malazan is a really good example by Steven Erikson. Obviously, that is very political and a series that I really want to get to, but there is another video that I want to do where I will talk more about that and series that are like that, because even though that is very political, I think there's other aspects to it that are perhaps stronger, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's why I didn't talk about that in this video, even though I know somebody will mention it in the comments and that's fine, but I just wanted to call that out. So there we have it, folks. Those are kind of top political fantasy series that are completed that I really want to get to as soon as possible. I definitely want to start at least 1 or 2 of these this year. Jury's out on which one that will be, but we'll see. If there's any particular ones that you think I might like or that you particularly enjoyed, let me know down below in the comments and I will see you there. Thanks for watching, folks. I hope you liked this one. If you did, please do give it a thumbs up and I will see you in my next video. Stay safe as always, take care, and I will see you very, very soon. Bye.